So Peter MacKay, your thoughts. I'm not shocked there is no pipeline in this because there is no pipeline proposal on the table. What's your sense and your expectations of what we will hear from the Prime Minister tomorrow?
Well, he has a lot of competing priorities that he's going to have to try to deal with. And one of those priorities is keeping his own caucus behind him. And there's already an environmental caucus breakout, if you will, led by some of the more left-leaning members of the Liberal Party. And so a pipeline commitment right out of the gate on this infrastructure spend, I think, would perhaps tip things away from him in terms of the politics of all of this. He's also got premiers, including Premier Smith, who, while disappointed, has expressed ongoing support. And she knows that there are some other things that has to happen first, as was pointed out. An investor, of course, in the actual pipeline, so there's something in it. And, of course, the legislation that she's called for that is going to remove some of the regulatory barriers, emissions cap, the tanker ban, the No Pipelines Bill, C-69, that Pierre Poilievre and others have railed against. And so this is a delicate balance. It's a rollout. Premier Smith also said, this is not the be-all and end-all. There's going to be a moving target in terms of how these projects will roll out. And the last thing I'd say, David, is having been through the big spend during the recession in the infrastructure world, the Canada Action Plan, that takes time to coordinate, but it also takes time to get those proverbial and real shovels in the ground. These are project commitments. And some of this is also going to require, private sector spending and provinces and in some cases municipalities being involved too. So a whole bunch of moving parts to get to the reality of it.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda, the pipeline has, as Daniel Smith would say, those federal regulatory challenges. There is a lack of a proponent. There's also British Columbia in the way and opposition, or at least doubt from Premier Eby. But, Danielle mentioned ports. My sense is you're going to see a lot of sort of things that close economic distance and increase capacity to get to overseas markets because you can't diversify if you can't get your goods there. What are your expectations for tomorrow?
Yeah, no surprise on pipelines. I think the only person who was genuinely surprised, or not genuinely, but acted surprised, was Pierre Poilievre, who was, on X, a little bit like that Chicken Little sky is falling mentality that he seems to really like. The sky is not falling. And this because if Premier Danielle Smith can offer a tempered response to the expectation the pipelines won't be at the list, then everyone else should too. And the Prime Minister has been mentioned. He telegraphed this earlier in the summer when he said how important it was, critically important, that a private developer be at the table in order to execute it. So I think when you spoke to Danielle, I think that the point that he made was really critical in shovel-ready projects. I imagine that in the first tranche of projects, because it's going to be important for this government to show that if we're putting a big emphasis on these nation-building projects, that we want some that are ready to go. And with the emphasis on diversifying our trading relationships, you can imagine that things like the ports will be really, really important to this first tranche of projects. How are we going to get to other markets? So while a pipeline is not on the table now, that still remains an opportunity, still remains something that we may see in the next several tranches. But tomorrow, I would expect to see more of those shovel-ready projects.
I mean, Jordan, to this point, there's been a lot of promise on potential meetings, process. We will get specifics. There's going to be the Build Canada Homes thing coming next week, and then more strategies and stuff throughout the fall, and of course with the budget. But tomorrow, how important is tomorrow to show something concrete, quick, and kind of deliverable?
I think it's really important because so far things have been very heavy on machinery of government, and there's been a lot of setting up of offices, a lot of drawing up of lists, and I do think that there is some impatience to get down to concrete project proposals. And so I would expect that the list that we're going to see tomorrow comprises of projects that are as Amanda said, that are shovel-ready, but also that are popular. So these are not going to be the projects that are divisive. These are going to be projects that, generally speaking, people are really going to be able to rally around. The pipeline issue is one that remains a really long-term challenge for the Prime Minister. And I think that one thing that's really notable about Prime Minister Carney is he sees himself as a deal maker. So I think what we saw today is the beginnings of an attempt maybe on his part to set up a bit of a grand bargain on the pipeline issue. So you could see there were some clear signals in his remarks around softening climate targets, prioritizing investment. And so perhaps there's a trade-off to be had there around things like scrapping the cap and getting some carbon capture investment going instead, things like that, what's happening with the industrial carbon price. But the challenge for him is going to be a political one. There's really no incentive for an Alberta Conservative, be that a federal one like Pierre Poilievre or Danielle Smith, to get to an endgame with any sitting Liberal government on the issue of pipelines. This is bread and butter for them politically. So he's going to have a really tough road to hoe on that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the collision, Shannon, of the build, the diversification, the big projects agenda, and the rolling back of some of their climate policies and things. I mean, what's your thoughts on where it's going to go in the next little while?
I think this fall was always going to be a difficult time for Mr. Carney. He was elected in such a strange sort of bubble, the headspace of the Canadian public, where all sort of the normal rules of political physics were suspended, and then things sort of went quiet for the summer, and now it's like the bills are coming due. Because I always thought as soon as you start having a list of projects and some things are on them and other things are not, all those premiers that were smiling and practically purring at the First Minister's table with him, all of a sudden, some of them are happy, some of them are not. And we've already seen that this week. Danielle Smith being displeased with him. The only thing that was surprising about that today was actually that she was quite mild and sort of easygoing about it and sort of said, it's a not yet, it's not a never. Yeah. But you're starting to see Doug Ford making displeased noises in the direction of the Prime Minister. So as soon as things go from being theoretical and being sort of very high-minded talk, and I don't mean by that it's inherently empty, but as soon as it goes from being theoretical about how we can stitch together one bigger, stronger Canadian economy instead of 13, and we can give ourselves more than the US can take away, that's all good. There's nothing to disagree with there.
Right.
But as soon as it becomes nuts and bolts and you have to move forward with some things and not others, then you start to have people less cooperative, less pleased with you. And also now is show your work time for Carney, where he has to have some deliverables to show some things to move forward on. And let's not forget, even these projects that are shovel ready, they're not like shovel ready tomorrow. No one's getting more jobs tomorrow. No one's goods are getting to water faster right away. There's a real mismatch between the timeline of his rhetoric and the urgency of the moment emotionally and the practicality of building big things.
Yeah, there's fast in normal people's thought process, and then there's fast in mega project process, and they're not the same thing.
No.
Look, you mentioned about the bills coming due. There's also a lot of bills coming, especially on justice, it seems, because the Prime Minister today, he hinted at some changes coming to Canada's criminal code this fall in the form of legislation. Have a listen to this.
All Canadians must be able to get up, go to work, go to their church, temple, mosque, community center, and then come home and sleep soundly at night. And when our laws repeatedly fail to protect those basic rights, we need new laws. This fall, we will propose legislation to make bail laws stricter for home invasions, for car thefts, for gang crime, shield Canadians from gun violence, and protect religious and community spaces from violence, intimidation, and hate.
Peter MacKay, that sounds like an ambitious series of criminal justice reform coming from a Liberal government that I have heard many of the ministers argue over the years. Bail system's working. This is, jurisprudence. This is a different posture being adopted, hinted at really in the first press conference after the election. What do you make of what you heard there? Oh, hang on now. We don't have Peter MacKay's audio. Oh, there we go. We got you. We didn't hear that. Start again, sir.
Not at all, David. Look, you used an important word there. You said election, and that is very much sounding like election talk and rhetoric that you expect traditionally from Conservatives. Issues around bail reform have been around a very long time. It was, certainly when I was at the Justice Department, this was something, again, that we were struggling with. It's complicated in many ways, in large part because this is the judiciary. This is arm's length. We can talk about making changes that will improve the process to get people before judges earlier, that we can make decisions around legislation that would perhaps restrict judges' ability to release people with certain conditions. But all of this, again, is a very emotional issue because crime rates are up. There's no denying that. And the gulf between rhetoric and reality is the political machinations about how to actually impact the justice system. Changing legislation, I don't think is going to be that difficult, but it's going to be a lot harder for the police, for those who work in the criminal justice systems, the Crown attorneys, lawyers, police, to actually see an impact on the street.
Yeah, look, crime is up, Amanda, over the last series of years. The most recent crime severity index, though, did show a drop of about 4%, 6% reduction, I believe, in nonviolent crime. But in places like the GTA, there is an increase in violent crime, right? So in very specific pockets of the country, there are enormous challenges. But this is a shift in the Liberal position from, I don't know, 2 years ago. A lot has changed, of course. I just wonder what you make of this move and these promises from the Prime Minister.
Well, I, for one, am a Liberal who is happy to see this news. I think for two reasons. One, because there's no reason why the Liberals should be taking a back seat on this issue that's so critically important to a lot of Canadians. What is dominating our headlines right now? It's tariffs, it's car thefts, it's home invasions, it's gang violence, it's protecting Canadians in their places of worship, it's about gun violence and illegal drugs. These are the topics that are consuming the minds of Canadians because they're very real and they're happening. And for whatever reason, the Liberals have continued to allow the Conservatives to dominate on this issue. They don't have to anymore. This is where the Prime Minister is playing politics better. He's playing with politics, he's also playing with policy, but he's identifying this area which they should be able to talk about because it is so important to Canadians and because they can do something about it. He's chipping away at those Conservative talking points and he's adopting an issue that I think is going to be really important in this session and the coming years.
Yeah, Jordan, it's interesting when Mark Carney met with the premiers in Huntsville, this was one of the things they talked about when he had his cabinet planning forum, don't call it a retreat, last week.
Retreating.
Yeah, he before his big news conference on the Friday, he met with Doug Ford that morning to talk about these issues, right? So clearly he's heard the message and we're going to see something on it.
Yeah, well, and of course, I think he and Doug Ford have a really common interest in being seen to be active on this issue. This was a really significant issue in key areas of the GTA, like Peel and York, that the Liberals did not do well in. So this is something that, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister talked about immediately after the election. There was a recognition that they had missed this issue, and it's being used as a cudgel by the Conservatives against them. So I think that one of the things that they're trying to do here is to act soon in order to sort of take that out of Pierre Poilievre's hands. We'll see how successful they are. I think there's a brand challenge there for the Liberals. They do have a bit of a reputation of being dismissive on this issue, even in this current government. There were some misfires on that from ministers early on. So we'll have to see if they are able to be seen to be trying to solve the problem in a way that resonates with the public.
Shannon, it's such an interesting shift from the Trudeau years where there would be this tendency to litigate the fine print of the arguments and criticisms of the criminal justice system rather than respond to sort of like the core truths of some of the things, right? And that seems to just been completely and mercilessly set aside.
Right.
And we're going to see that, it seems.
Well, the thing is, and I looked at the same stats you did, I looked it up because I wanted some empirical sense of where are crime rates going, but I don't think that's how people's brains work.
No,
people's
absolutely
brains,
not.
especially with something this emotive, they live on narrative. And look at what we've seen even in the last week, that horrifying home invasion in Vaughan where a man was killed in front of his family. No stat in the world wipes that story. That is like a horror movie out of people's brains. And so then politically and emotionally, you have to respond to how people are feeling about things regardless of what the numbers show. But what I find really interesting is Carney's sort of willingness or even eagerness to just eat the lunch right off Pierre Poilievre's tray on multiple issues, and this being the latest. And the thing that's kind of interesting about Carney is because his communication is so precise, he's so deliberate in what he says, you can detect immediately when there's an alteration or an expansion of the message. And in the last week, even from cabinet meeting last week, cabinet retreat, pardon me, I'm going to call it a retreat. Nobody can make me stop. And this week at caucus, it's affordability because we know the priorities of those issues have flipped for people, and crime. And I see that as a very specific defensive maneuver. It's like, we're going to own this. We're not going to give you any rope to hang us with on this. We're going to be proactive about it. And it seems like a kind of a wily political move given where the public mood is and how people are responding to it.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre keeps saying, steal our ideas, but he may want that put into the criminal code.
I don't think he really really
Mark Carney
wants
keeps
them to
doing
do
it,
it this much,
and
no.
it works for him politically.
No.
Okay, look, not the day we're expecting, but thank you all for rolling with the changing news agenda. And Peter MacKay, thank you for joining us. Amanda Alvaro, Peter MacKay, Shannon Proudfoot, and Jordan Likeness. Thank you all again.